society, as their job, or in their personal life. Moreover, education can act through a well-balanced curriculum, which is also modern, and that builds a sense of belonging and promotes democratic active citizenship. That is why we should regard education as an investment and not a public expense. And I would like to perhaps highlight what the Rector of College, Bruce, said. The power of education is perhaps to empower each future citizen. We all know disinformation and fake news are also affecting the way in which we perceive and relate to changes and debates in society. Media literacy, understood as the skill to navigate large amounts of information from multiple sources and communicate it on different platforms, has become a requirement, I would say, for the health of our societies. But digital skills alone are not enough to empower citizens who are taking their news from online outlets. Critical thinking and advanced literacy skills are increasingly needed to help all active citizens to look for the source and filter any information through their own reasoning and value system. And we all know the COVID-19 crisis has sped up digitalization of teaching and learning and highlighted the complex role not just of teachers, but of schools and universities alike. We now perhaps treasure more the social role of education, and we understand better that human beings don't just learn by acquiring information, they learn by interacting in a healthy way with each other. As shown by the PISA tests, we see that socioeconomic background has a deep impact on school performance. Too many young people drop out of school before gaining the skills they need to get into the labor market, and unfortunately the pandemic did not help in this regard. At the beginning of this month, as we know here in Romania, 2 new education laws came into force. Of course, this new legislative framework is based on equity, equality, and inclusion, alongside principles very dear to higher education, such as academic freedom, university autonomy, and freedom of thought and expression. Because otherwise, we lose the essential of what a university is. The education governance structures and communities will also benefit from the reforms and investments in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. And our plan is to deliver a reform which brings our education system and thus our society closer to the green and digital transformations. Some of these reforms are already undergoing. I would like just to mention a few of them. First of all, reducing early school leaving and increasing autonomy of schools to identify and implement specific measures. Each school is unique. Each school has a grant with which they tailor the measures needed to make sure no child loses its potential or the opportunity to have equal access to education. Secondly, we have developed an inclusive and qualitative early education system and care in order to make sure that the socioeconomic background of children does not impact on their ability to go through the mandatory education years. Thirdly, we have established a full dual route, dual professional education route that provides access all the way to higher education, but with a graduate profile that guarantees democratic competences. Being good at your job does not mean that you cannot and should not be an active citizen in a democratic society. At the same time, our attitudes towards values and democracy are shaped every day through interactions with the entire community. And in order to ensure more mindful approaches in our daily interactions, we introduced in 2023 the Green Week, a school educational program that foresees educational activities which raise attitudes, knowledge, and skills linked to the prevention of climate change and the protection of the environment. We're trying to also bring forward inter- and transdisciplinary approaches and bring kids closer to the environment, to our Dear participants, before drawing the end of my intervention, I would just like to reiterate that I do not see how any prosperous state can continue to be prosperous and democratic without active citizens which are well trained and flexible for the changes and challenges of the future. Education is one of the fundamental components of any modern and democratic society, as we all know. And I think the times we live force us to act now. A democratic Europe can only exist with an educated Romania. We need to be clear and firm in our goals to deliver strong and modern education systems which don't just fulfill the needs of today, but also shape the world of tomorrow. I want to thank the National University of Political Science and Public Administration, my university, I'm very proud to say, for being the partner of the Ministry of Education in organizing this forum for the first time in line with the other events of the Treaties initiative. I think it's a very good start, which should continue in the next years. Thank you.
Dear Minister, dear Ligia, thank you very much for supporting us in organizing this. As Rector of National University of Political Studies and Public Administration, I have to underline that SADECKI, this is the acronym of my university, SADECKI, participated 5 years ago in the organization of the forum here in Bucharest. We were co-organizers, and we are very proud this time we succeeded to add this component related to democracy. In fact, initially we started to think at university cooperation, but we realized it would be a mistake to focus just on this. We have to understand the bigger role that education, research can play in development of society, and first of all, in trying to strengthen the democratic values of our society. This morning, very early, I read the joint declaration of our head of state and government, and I tried, as a professor of communication, to identify the keywords of this declaration and somehow compare with the same declaration 8 years ago. And probably you well remember this idea started with increasing the economic cooperation to coordinate the efforts of the 12 states in building infrastructure and a lot of economic infrastructure, connectivity, energy talks, which I'm not at all against. But as the minister said, how can we have a strong society and a strong economy without a strong education and democratic values? And finally, we came up with the idea, discussing with our colleagues from the government, who are in charge with the organization of the forum, and discussing with the Romanian Minister of Education to organize this side event on democratic challenges, and I hope this topic will be integrated in the future 3Cs initiative activities. I thought from the yesterday declaration, the point 18, number 18 from the declaration says, we reaffirm our commitment to work together for connectivity in science, education, technology and innovation to provide more sustainable future development for the 3Cs initiative region. And so we had in mind this idea. It's not us writing down this paragraph, but we were in the same line, and we tried to put together for today this session, inviting people from academia, but also from the governmental and international relations. And we have this session shared into, let's say, slots. The first one, moderated by our colleague Rector Negrescu, which somehow already started, due Minister of European Affairs in the very complicated year 2019, when Romania had to manage the presidency of the European Council, Vice Rector of our university, and I'm very happy he accepted to take this position for a period of time, and today back in the Parliament and Vice President of the Commission on Education. Victor, thank you for participating, and Professor of our university in Amsterdam. Thank you for accepting to play this role today. You have the floor.
Thank you, Rector. Thank you, Minister, for your very constructive and, of course, positive intervention. I think it lays the ground for our debate in this panel, where we have three prominent guests. Before introducing them, I would just underline briefly the fact that, of course, without democracy, we cannot have a strong economy. I know there is strong emphasis in this format to speak about economic cooperation, about connectivity, but also we need a strong education system, and exchanging on this respective issue is key right now. And of course, in order to face the challenges that we have in front of us, but also the regional challenges, it is key to discuss about that and how we can do that. And today we have three guests in this panel. I will just introduce them and say a couple of words about them before giving each of them the floor. I would like to have initially a short intervention underlining the main issue of our panel, which is a global perspective regarding, of course, those democratic challenges that we are currently facing. And after that, I will come back to them with a short question. Of course, we have limited time, so we'll kindly ask each of the speakers to also try to have as precise as possible interventions during the panel. So we have Ambassador Sorin DUCARU, is here on my right. He is the Director of the European Union Satellite Center since 2019. He has a long experience, of course, in different institutions, but also a long diplomatic experience and a long academic experience as well. And we are happy to have him with us today. We also have Andrzej. He is the head of the Central European Department at the Center for Eastern Studies in Poland. Warsaw, has a long experience in Central and Eastern Europe, working on different initiatives, also horizon projects. This is also something that needs to be underlined. We need to emphasize the need to bring our energies together also in the European competitions. Why not? And bring our added value in the European framework. And last but not least, we also have Florent MARCIACQ. He's the Deputy Secretary General of the Austro-French Center for Rapprochement in Europe, in Austria. He worked as a researcher. He understands really well the region. He has a strong focus on European integration in the Western Balkans and Eastern neighborhood. You have noticed also at the summit level that this has been one of the key angles of the debate between all leaders. So, after presenting our guests for this panel, I will come back to each of them and briefly ask them, and I'll start with Ambassador DUCARU, to say a few words about this global perspective that needs to be taken into consideration by the members of the 3Cs initiative, and also to underline to a certain extent how in your work you are basically interacting with this initiative, but also with the member states, and how we can also be more present, especially at the level of the European Union Satellite Center, where you are doing a great job. Dear Ambassador.
Thank you very much indeed. And let me start by thanking the organizers and SFL and Ministry of Education for putting this on the agenda in the framework of the 3Cs initiative, because frankly, we cannot really promote the objectives of prosperity and actually security, which is very much on anyone's mind, without putting democracy on the forefront. So I will address democracy from a security dimension and also include some technology flavor in this, because it has to do also with what I'm doing, so taking the advice of the moderator. Now, it's well known that democracy can never be taken for granted. We saw this in history. It can erode also from the inside, from populism, lack of strength of institutions, corruption, outstanding economic factors, or social political polarization, complacency, and so on. But when outside factors are added, when it is frankly under attack from outside forces, sometimes with insider access or even with insider collusion, then the picture is much more complex, and I think the first reflex is to think democracy definitely in strategic and security terms. And actually we are, as we speak, in such a situation. Because there is a warm confrontation, there is a war going on in our neighborhood, with all the brutality and characteristics of a classical war, but also with the subtleties of, I would say, the hybrid warfare strategy and tactics. And at the heart of this strategy is, to use one sentence, one word, is frankly the weaponization of everything. Definitely of information, of narratives, of values distortion, hijacking of values, turning them upside down, making frankly anti-values value distortions, using some types of values to put in them against others. And let's recall that anti-Semitism or racism were promoted in the name of patriotism during Nazi times. And frankly, we can see some tendencies today. There's anti-Ukrainism in the name of patriotism. We see it all over when we watch the news and so on. And interesting that mostly induced, as I said, from the outside of there. So beyond this strategic approach, the hybrid strategic approach, there is the aspect of the amplifying effect of modern technologies. So there are some very potent tools deployed today, empowered by modern technologies, under the cover of modernity, efficiency, sometimes democratic values, democratic access to information, freedom of expression. But if we don't look to them from all the angles, I'm afraid that we might become captive. And there have been already many examples where social media platforms, deep fake, and very fast-growing modern artificial intelligence tools can become potent weapons against democracy in this context. So I think it's essential that this Street Seas initiative considers these aspects in addressing them for convergent understanding, setting convergent mindset, but why not also convergent policy, strategy, and actions? Why? I think there are some good ingredients. Yes, there is this geographic, geopolitical dimension that has generated, that was at the heart of the Three Seas initiative, and frankly with a historic, I would say, seed of the intermarium process, but also because the countries are pretty much on the similar type of attack. And frankly, there's another element that the more recent historic experience and memory of the non-democratic times. So in order to address defense of democracies, and I will plan to end on this note, at a strategic level, I think first there has to be an approach in Now, regulation should be seen from the perspective of responsibility and accountability on this wide information highway, not as something against freedom of expression or all the other democratic values. And I think we have so many examples where the use or the action in the field of information has been associated with accountability. So in the normal, the time where the responsibility of press entities has been defined, or on other occasions. So this is an important fine-tuning element and has to be addressed so that we are better protected. And there's a third dimension, which is that of operationalization or action. I think that there are a lot of aspects that can be considered here, starting with relevant exchanges of information or analysis among the 3Cs countries, coordination of policies for implementation or projects, developing trusted fact-checking platforms or entities, and many other aspects. I will not prolong this too much, but I think this element of considering a coordinated approach at the strategic level on these three layers, education, regulation, and action, would be my main proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think it's very important that you outline the issue of convergence and putting education at the top. I also want to underline that, of course, here in this room we also have representatives of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, of course, also Secretary of State in charge of education in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and this is good. So, based on this idea of convergence, I will move to Mr. SADECKI. So we speak about convergence, we speak about the region, sometimes we speak about disparities, the gap between East and West. How would you approach these issues in the context of the challenges that we are facing, and how should our region react or act when it comes to bringing further convergence at regional level, but also with the more developed countries in the West?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for organizing it and inviting me. It's a big pleasure to be here. I think it's definitely the biggest building I ever spoke at, so I'm a little bit intimidated too. I would like to focus in this brief intervention on the biggest event that happened in the last years in the region, obviously the Russian invasion in Ukraine, on Ukraine, and the consequences for the region. Obviously, if we discuss the issues of the values, this I think proved to be a sign that our basic values of freedom, democracy, security cannot be taken for granted, and I think this assumption in the region, which is of course in the direct neighborhood of the conflict, led to an unprecedented mobilization of these countries, which I think we don't always acknowledge. The region has been at the forefront of the support to Ukraine, and it's both, of course, on the state level, the political help, military help. We don't always that experience with supporting refugees from Ukraine. So it became not only a political thing, but also something that that is an everyday experience of most of the citizens in the region. But going back to the political level, I think is to a large extent what is happening has vindicated what the initiative was established for. So the idea to increase the connections between the countries, to increase the integration of this region between these countries within the EU, and the world. It also showed that this is not only about economy. Of course, economy is the prime issue here to create new impulses for the region, but it's also the idea to also integrate the region to be able to help Ukraine, to integrate the region to improve military mobility, etc., etc. So another, I think, essential issue when we think about the consequences of the war is that, and it was already addressed a little bit by the previous speaker, the need to improve the resilience of the region. So we have seen actually, I mean, that's a part of the success of the last year and a half, that most countries of the region were able to actually limit the spaces where countries that are willing to undermine the security, democracy, and freedom of these countries, this space has been shrinking. I mean, in terms of course, making the economies more resilient, but also to be more aware about other kind of threats, disinformation and other softer kind of threats. And I think here there are still a lot of things to do. Some things have been achieved. I think a year and a half ago everyone would be still very much afraid whether we will survive without Russian energy, and now we actually prove that it can be actually done. So my final remark would be perhaps about the region in a little bit wider terms, although since yesterday not only Ukraine but also Moldova are the countries that are associated with the Three Seas initiative, and I think here the role of the region of Central European countries, of the Three Seas initiative countries, would be to help or to assist these countries, also the Western Balkans region, to on the way to the EU. Finally, after many years of mudding through, we have some progress in terms of EU enlargement. We expect by the end of the year the decision on the opening of the accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. So here there is a huge role for the region, and it's not only political support, but also these countries are directly neighboring the region. So in terms of bringing them to Europe, this is the way to integrate infrastructure, to improve the things that are sort of at the soil of the Three Seas initiative. And maybe final thought would be on the reconstruction of Ukraine, which hopefully will start
Three Cities Initiative was having economical Ukraine as observers. So you also briefly mentioned something that I think is able to move to the next speaker, Mr. MARCIACQ, on the issue of enlargement. Of course, you know, you being from Austria, would also would like to ask you about another issue, not the Schengen enlargement, which is a key issue for us, but I will not do that. And I will still focus on the enlargement issue, which is important. To which degree, of course, the region can contribute to that in improving the integration of Western Balkan countries, both Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. How the issue of enlargement can be helpful for the region as well, or can become a topic, because, of course, this is an issue that has been part of the debate. So let's correlate that with the global perspective that we can offer to the region.
Thank you. When we think about enlargement, we can think about what a place democracy should play in the accession process. And this is not very clear to me. But it's not very clear to me not only for enlargement, because this is the most visible part. It's not even clear to me for the internal part of the European integration process, what kind of place democracy should play. We've heard a lot about connectivity and so on, and security. That's the history of European integration. But European democracy remains a very, very fuzzy concept. So now, if we live in geopolitical times, it can be useful to look back on how previous societies, ourselves, Western countries, if you will, we previously approached this nexus, this tension between democracy, security, and geopolitics. That's the debate we have now already happened in the 60s. So Walter Lippmann, who coined, one of the person who coined the term of Cold War, an author, American author, a journalist, he developed a thought that democracy should be judged based on its effectiveness, outputs, security, prosperity. Nowadays we would put connectivity, projects, pragmatism. So you need to achieve that, to deliver that, and that's the way you consolidate democracy. That was his thought. In geopolitical times, this is how it should be done. To do that, he published a book, and the term state, you have to build a manufacture of consent. So basically, you have experts trying to merge acceptability among the masses, mobilize passive support, what nowadays we would call strategic communication. So that's the bulk of the idea of the 60s of Walter Lippmann. Now, what is interesting is, the debate is even older than the 60s, is Walter Lippmann had someone not very much agreeing with this argument, called John Dewey, a philosopher, so very much into pedagogy. And this John Dewey, who left quite a big mark, says if you give up the power to experts and to nurturing acceptability, the response in the public will be populism, will be a rejection of experts, a rejection of strategic communication. We will fuel the fire of rejection and polarization by focusing on democracy as output instead of input, where the legitimacy is the key challenge. So now, when we think back about that, I'm trying. That's why I'm thinking now. What are we as Europeans doing, and how we try to promote democracy, if ever? We certainly promote democracy as Europeans by supporting the efforts of national member states, but that's not European democracy. That's a very different thing. In terms of European democracy, we are still very much focused on outputs. We have very constitutionalized bulk of law on economy, on monetary policy. We have a lot of projects now, very high agenda on connectivity, and they are all good, don't get me wrong. But we have this history which is extremely anchored in European sphere. What we don't have is a definition of European democracy. We don't have a charter, so a European charter, the European democratic charter. We have rule of law, we have fundamental rights, but the Weimar Republic and other instance, show that it's not because you have the two that you have democracy. You can see the trees without seeing the forest. This is the thing in the Western Balkans. And in other countries, if you keep looking at rule of law only and fundamental rights only, and attacking them or trying to defend them through market-based, anti-discriminatory mechanisms, you're missing the forest of democracy. What we don't have is a definition of European democracy going in this sense. There's a reason for that, and beyond the fact that we don't agree with the member states on the definition of what it should include, is that we don't have the public sphere. And this is, I think, where it starts. A public sphere, and that goes back to my friend John Dewey, the pedagogician. To build a public sphere, you need to build European citizens. You don't become European citizens because you join the EU, because you're 18. It's not how it works. You don't become citizens just because you pass some age or you get a passport. To build European citizenry, you need to grow a generation of citizens. So that's where I come to some recommendations. What we would need probably to see more often is to draw lessons of what has worked. So I'm thinking about Erasmus, and this can question a lot of education, but we focus too much on university education when identities are already formed. What we should look at is secondary education. Mobility at the secondary level, not as a one-off thing, but as a normal thing, included in the curriculum where students, whether in the EU or in accession countries, can exchange. So then we can put it, if you want to use contemporary words, school connectivity. But it goes together, and if you try to build this dimension of mobility among pupils in secondary education, you will need to think about what to teach, what to exchange. This is why it goes to European civic education. Multilingualism. So these are the basics. If we don't start here, this is very much an investment. It will last two generations to bring together this kind of democratic thinking among the younger generation. But I think in the longer term, if we don't have that, we will start talking, we will keep talking about democracy as outputs. We will continue to link democracy to security and geopolitics, and by the way, just fuel the reaction of societal polarization. What we need is to build some kind of new generation. Erasmus started at Ligia with only 11 countries joining and 3,000 students exchanging. You don't need to be all on board to do that. That can be also an initiative from here. Okay.
Thank you. I think it's important, of course, to define democracy. I think I really like what you said. You do not become citizens by simply joining the EU. And here I'm at, of course, by also sharing the values. And one of the values that have been underlined here today, the issue of solidarity. And of course, solidarity should be applied in all cases. And of course, here in Romania, particularly refer to the issue of Schengen Delta. But this is another issue to be discussed later on. We are short on time, but nevertheless, I suggested that we'll ask questions to each of the speakers. I will briefly ask to answer in 30 seconds. I will be as short as possible. So, Ambassador DUCARU, you mentioned many issues, but you also put in a contrast democracy and security. And this is a question that is often being addressed here. How is our region answering to these different topics, democracy and security? Is this a challenge here in our region, or you believe that we'll be capable of putting those two challenges together?
Thanks for the question. I think democracy is pretty much under pressure and sometimes an attack in a broader geographic area and pretty much all over Europe. But I think there's a special danger in this part of the Europe due to this proximity to an area of conflict and all the support that is given, for example, by European nations, especially by neighboring nations to Ukraine, makes their societies target to this hybrid tactics that I mentioned. Way ahead, there's one dimension of resilience, so making the societies more resilient. on and strengthen the resilience against the attacks that are posed towards our democracies.
Thank you, Ambassador. Indeed, this is the case. Of course, I will link that to something that Mr. SADECKI mentioned earlier, the issue of reconstruction of Ukraine and support for Republic of Moldova. So, what do you believe could be our contribution from this region in the reconstruction?
That's a great debate now ongoing, I suppose. But, well, I suppose we should assess our capabilities. I mean, as I said before, I mean, there are no huge financial assets in the region to invest in Ukraine. Definitely, in some smaller areas, it's doable. But I think where we can see a very important role for the region is to be the sort of anchor of Ukraine and the sort of hinterland to provide connections through roads, through rails, through also experience we have. I mean, Ukraine is in a way a part of the region. I mean, we have certain experience, certain understanding also how to approach it. So I think that hopefully will be one of the great projects for Central European countries for the years to come. Although it's, I mean, a sort of pragmatic assessment. Also, what can we do is important, not to inflate too much our expectations.
Thank you. And of course, all that is linked again to democracy. And you mentioned democracy, the lack of definition. Do you believe there is a difference of approach when it comes to democratic challenges between our region here and maybe the western part of Europe? Is there any division, or do we have the same perspective and hopefully the same goal?
Well, we do take that differently on how to organize our societies. We don't talk so much about it because these are highly divisive topics. In particular, what kind of supranational, so the way of supranationalism and the willingness to build a political community which is a democratic one, which is different from the national one, is different. I think here we have some space to talk about it. What is a bit disturbing then is that in this respect, when we try to talk to accession countries or countries which would like to come in the EU, if we don't have a very clear understanding of what we aim for, we strive for as a European community, then we cannot signal that very clearly. And that is precisely this space which strongmen use, whether it was the Balkans and elsewhere, to counter its democratic push from the EU. So here I think this is a page which should open all so the competence and education are not on the EU level, for instance, and the democracy is very weak. So these are fields where we need a deepening of the dialogue among the member states, and also with the countries which will soon join the EU, hopefully.
Thank you so much. I think it was a really good and interesting conversation, interesting debate, touched upon many issues, and of course, a global perspective of the species initiative, but also enlargement, democratization, education. So thank you so much for your contributions, and now we'll move back to the director.
Thank you to all. I go directly to Ioana to start the second part.
Thank you. Well, we are on a very, very tight schedule, so I will give the floor to the first panelist, which is Mrs. Alina. She's director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy from Austria. Former director, okay, apparently. Meanwhile, some changes happen. Anyway, she's an expert in geopolitics, and she's here for her expertise in the region. I will kindly ask you not only to adjust to this very limited time that we have, the 5 minutes each, but also also to focus more on the regional perspective over the 3 years time. Okay? You have the floor.
Thank you to our wonderful moderator. Thank you to the organizers. It's a great pleasure. I'm also very, very happy to see all familiar faces, some of whom are meanwhile in very, very important positions here in Romania. This is the way forward. Yes, indeed, I'm a former director of the Austrian Institute for European Security Policy based in Vienna. Right now, I'm in fact part of the steering committee, which is drafting a new security strategy in Austria. The last one being well, from 2013, and I'm currently consulting the Liberal Party on matters of security and defense. Now, let me present my 5 minutes pitch for why the Treaties Initiative, as seen from the perspective of geopolitical expert and strategist as I am, is the most ambitious and the most important regional initiative when it comes to geopolitics and geoeconomics in the 21st century, when it comes to the future of Europe. First and foremost, and these are my key theses, it is because Russia is waging not only a kinetic war on the second largest European country, but also has been waging a non-kinetic war, that is a war without military means, in fact, on Europe. And of course, from Russian perspective, the most, let's say, vulnerable part of the old continent remains the so-called post-Soviet space. This is the soft belly of Europe, how to actually inflict the most pain in economic, but also in geopolitical terms. And in fact, if we take a look at the regional dynamics of this region, if you see how the infrastructure has been built not only during the Cold War, but also the last 30 years, namely mostly East-West wars instead of, let's say, north to south, you see clearly the vacuum, not only in terms of security, but also in terms of geoeconomics. So here we have not only Russia, but we have also other key external players that are eager to penetrate, to subvert, to actually get hold, stronghold in this soft belly via different means and tools. And of course, they have let's say, little to no interest in seeing strengthened institutions, vibrant democratic societies, and functioning, in fact, democratic processes in these countries, because this would mean automatically that they will have more, let's say, more efforts. On the one hand, they will have to spend more efforts to penetrate the space, but also they will have less instruments to do so. So we know for a fact 3 pillars, 3 important pillars: energy, infrastructure, and digital connectivity, and all of them are actually linked directly to democracy, to the very idea of democracy, to the very idea of actually how we want to further and, let's say, promote our vision of not only our European liberal economic and security order, but also global one. So this is my next key thesis, and I know I don't have many good news for you, but I think that we are here for the sake of intellectual exchange rather than to tell ourselves some nice, narratives and pitches. And here it is that the war actually that Russia launched on Ukraine has been also the trigger for the manifestation of Cold War 2.0. So here, once again, the region, and this is a whole region from the north to the south, is at the forefront. It's practically first-tier region for the new Cold War between the United States on the one hand and the Dragon Bear, which is not just Russia, but Russia and China as a collective modus vivendi of coordination that entails all of the tools and instruments. So, third important point, third key thesis, when it comes to this non-kinetic warfare that I'm addressing, and why it is important for this particular region to actually deal with it collectively and not individually in terms of 12 and meanwhile 13 countries, is that it entails not only the energy, and yes, of course, energy has been key point since the beginning, but right now we have actually the same situation with other commodities. It's Specifically, as we see here in Romania, we know for a fact that global food crisis 2.0 is in the making because of Russia's blockade in the Black Sea. So this is a direct threat to our societies, and I can give you plenty of examples why this kind of cascading effects, this kind of second-order effects will have own societies in our democratic countries. But also think of the nuclear blackmail, which is another perfect example of how you have an impact on democratic societies, because we are like big boxes of chocolates open to everyone. Everyone can actually grab a chocolate, can eat it, can bring back the, half of it or do whatever they want with us. Whereas we are dealing with a competitor and with a rival, and I would even argue to the point of an enemy that actually has 100% control of information flow and information space. So it is a complete asymmetry in terms of trying to actually cope with the challenges. The next important point is that even migration, and we've heard already from the first panel, everything is being weaponized. And once again, we've seen this before the war, and we are going to see further examples where exactly this kind of regional format is going to be first-tier playground for the weaponization of migration flows. And I do not only mean those coming from Ukraine and from the other war zones and frozen conflicts in Eastern Europe. We have many of them, but I also mean, of course, North African terrain, where actually Russia also has the tools to instigate migration flows. Final point, of course, yes, we've heard about information and cyber operations. In fact, Ukraine has been the country that has faced the largest number of cyber operations even before the beginning of the war. So my point is once again that we pretend that we live in peace times and that we actually know what we deal with, but we forget actually that we have 30 years in between, and the whole Sovietologist playbook is somewhere, forgotten in some probably floors of our ministries from a previous time. And we need, when it comes to education and when it comes to strengthening the resilience of our democratic societies, first and foremost, we need to be open and honest with our own societies, with our own population, in terms of the direct and indirect threats, risks, and challenges. We need to start by an open and public debate. And I, being in Austria, can give you the perfect example how it backfires when you don't do that. I mean, in terms of the rise of populist political forces, not only on behalf of the far right, but also actually on behalf of the extreme left. So in a sense, what we need to do now is to actually start using the right terminology of what we are having, because when you finally look at the big picture, and this is unfortunately what we are not able to do because we are just overwhelmed with the daily business of war and the daily business of trying to support Ukraine, which is the right thing to do, but we are missing the bigger picture here. And the bigger picture is that we ourselves have become target of a very sophisticated rival, a very sophisticated competitor who is trying to capitalize on global system shifts and on change in global order, and is trying to become, so to say, a wild card in a bigger competition, which is not with us. We could be the victim of this, of the missed opportunity to actually address the reality the way it is. But it is a competition between two systemic rivals, namely the United States and China. And here, what I think is going to be the biggest challenge, also for our democratic societies and our political elites in these 13 countries, is that we need to prevent, by all means, any possibility of a kind of bifurcation of Europe because of this upcoming competition. What do I mean by that? Bifurcation in the sense that sooner or later, we all will be confronted, the countries here will be confronted with a very tough choice to pick sides, as it happened during the Cold War. And right now we pretend in Europe that it's about us, that we can actually de-risk our relationship with China with a bigger, let's say, economic competitor, that we do not want to see a security risk. At the very same time, yes, we address, of course, Russia as the biggest security risk, while ignoring the coordination of China. So in a sense, we are stuck in a gray zone where we do not want to see that the new world is struggling to get born, and we are still stuck to a world that is dying the way we have been benefiting from it. So let's get our collective efforts to come up with all the ideas and all the good solutions, and I have also some for the Q&A, how to actually deal with the situation and to act accordingly, and not to wait until all of these systemic processes manifest themselves to the point that we are in an absolute, let's say, worst case scenario situation.
Thank you. I will for sure use the fact that I'm a moderator and at the end of the meeting I will have at least one question, but maybe also others will. I will invite the second following panelist, being Marta Halina Deca from the World Studies University in Warsaw. Thank you for coming. Thank you for adjusting to what I asked. Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being here, the possibility. I was the head of research grant last year, which was financed by Ministry of Defense in Poland, and I will talk about regional perspective, as the moderator asked, and challenges and opportunities in the context of results of my research on the 3Cs initiative. I was concentrated on economic dimension of security, which means economic security and security of economics. And it will be a very short piece of my research. The bigger part is included in my book. And I just want to mention global megatrends, white cards, and weak signals for 3Cs initiative, and security and economic dimension of security in this context. So I will start with global megatrends, which are phenomena of social, economic, political, and technological changes that provide disruptive phenomena and affect many areas of life. And according to my research, there are 4 megatrends which are the most important for the future of 3Cs initiative and its countries. And they are widening divergence of regional population trends, the global phenomenon of aging population, increasing social inequalities and disparities around the world, as well increasing inefficiencies in health systems and social security system. So it's very interesting that economic dimension of security is influenced by social trends. And now I want to mention white cards, which are potential future events which can change dramatically the current processes, either positively or negatively. And they belong to political, economic, and social area. And according to my research, there are the most important ones. They are weakening of integration processes in European Union, social and political attitudes against European Union, limitations, suspension or lack of disbursement of development funds from EU, protracted pandemic and global economic crisis, including energy crisis, deepening of protectionist trends in the economy, in the country's economies. And the next problem mentioned by my previous speakers is negative effects of climate change, which has huge results in public expenditure, as well as increasing power of populist and extreme parties in many countries of Free Seas Initiative. And the last huge challenge, which is a white card, is the old one, but it still exists, and it's migration as a result of civil wars in Africa and Middle East, and social conflicts due to increasing poverty. And the last part of my presentation, I would like to concentrate on weak signals, which are triggers of further changes. And they can be good and positive as well, but I see more negative, unfortunately. So, in my opinion, the most important are uneven commitment of Free Seas Initiative countries to the Free Seas Initiative Fund, lack of new investors in the fund, limited or delayed disbursement from European Union. The money for development is very important. The next problem is lack of implementation of the US promises to co-finance the fund, as well as unstable situation on global and regional stock exchanges which influence economics. And the next problem is change of presidents and high representatives in the Free Seas Initiative countries and partner countries. The next problem is Poland. I know I'm Polish and I see a problem. It's a Polish activity. Many countries perceive Poland as a partner which is too active, which wants to dominate other countries. And the other problems are divergent perceptions of strategic partners and enemies among Free Seas Initiative countries. And the last one problems are extension of the time to lift Maastricht fiscal limits after pandemic, as well as the lack of regional and global agreements on climate policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, we will go directly to our colleague from Austria, Daniel Martinek, from the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe. He's a research associate there. Please.
That's correct. Thank you very much. May I start?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much also to the organizers for inviting me for this session today, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm not only a research associate at the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe in Vienna, but I'm also very much involved in the permanent secretariat of the Danube Rectors Conference. Maybe you've heard about this institution called the DRC, and we are a network of more than 60 universities coming from the region of Central, East, and Southeastern Europe. So, also from that perspective, I'm very happy that we also touch upon the issues such as education, higher education, research, and so on within today's session, which of course perceive as very much important, and within this organization we very much support, promote, and facilitate international and cross-border cooperation of higher education institutions coming from the region. But not to exceed my time today and stick really into 5 minutes, my time today, I would like to focus on the topic of discussion, and it's the democratic values, challenges and opportunities, which I'm giving as IDM very much. Many issues have been actually mentioned already today, so I'm not going to repeat these statements. I can definitely share the view that there is a need for kind of Europeanness as a tool or as a perspective of belonging to a certain group in Europe, and definitely the need for European public sphere is definitely something we really need to focus on and develop in the future. Unfortunately, from my perspective, very groups of people or many people are kind of stuck in this nation-state mindset still, despite the fact that we have programs such as Erasmus or other international cooperations, which should actually kind of open eyes of these people and indicate them that working in, cooperating in Europe is the only way how to cope with transformative challenges and geopolitical challenges in general. This is unfortunately not happening, and as it was already mentioned also before, Erasmus Plus is a really nice example how to promote maybe this Europeanness, but at the same time, what we can observe is that, for example, we have MPs or people working in the EU institutions, which should represent the peak of European cooperation efforts, and at the same time, when they come back and working in their specific countries, they are at the same time promoting highly nationalistic agenda, blaming the Brussels for all things happening and so on. So I think we can see quite paradoxical situation, people working at the EU institutions, but at the same time promoting highly nationalistic agendas back at home. So in that sense, I would like to argue that it doesn't necessarily mean if you are working in Brussels that we will be in favor of deeper cooperation, deeper integration, or creating some kind of European supranational governance structure. Then another challenge that I see here is that despite we have these different regional cooperation formats existing in Europe, the approach to these very much always depends also on the approach of the relevant governments to these cooperation formats. We can see on the example of the Visegrad Group, which is, at least from a geopolitical point of view or European point of view, rather not active these days. But we can also see it, for example, and to a different extent, the countries are dedicated or committed to the cooperation within the 3Cs initiative format. What I would like to also mention today here is this, as it was already mentioned, that this forum, this summit, or this format is very much fostering infrastructure, connectivity, and mobility. What we definitely also need is this social connectivity, because what we can observe in the region in the past months, years is, as it was already mentioned, the high polarization of societies, high fragmentation of political landscapes in these various countries, which consequently, at the end of the day, in some cases didn't or doesn't even allow to form a stable and long-term government which would at least which would last at least for the election cycle of 4 years. So this is something that we can observe nowadays, that the post-election negotiations are difficult due to the reason that the political landscape is very much fragmented in these countries, and that contributes a lot to the instability of these countries. We also mentioned different perception of democracy and the rule of law in Europe. That's also something that not only that maybe we try to project our vision of values, democratic values, to the world, but we should very much focus also within Europe of what is exactly our perception, or what should be the framework of particularly in the region of Central and Eastern Europe. But at the same time, I don't want to be too pessimistic or negative. There are definitely opportunities because what the implications of the full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine also showed us was that each and every country which is part of the treaties initiative, but I mean also in general in the region, showed or reject the solution of international conflicts or resolving of international conflicts and then just by the tools of war conflict. I believe, of course, there are different extents how the countries of our region provided support to Ukraine, be it military, humanitarian support and so on. This is something we can definitely discuss, but at the very core, at the end of the day, we are all at the same page when it comes to support Ukraine and rejecting the war as a tool to resolve geopolitical conflicts or international tensions. Yeah, I'll probably stop here, and yeah, these were my 2 cents to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I have to say that I'm very curious. You mentioned that Visegrad, in your view, is not an effective cooperation framework. I'm very curious if you find the 3Cs initiative an effective one. But I will come back to you at the end. Okay? So the following panelist is Deca, who is an executive lead in DUCARU, Slovakia, and from what I know, will approach the topic of energy and energy challenges at the level of affiliate.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed audience. Allow me first of all to start by thanking the organizers for putting in place such an excellent high-level event with so many timely topics in focus. I would especially like to take this opportunity and to thank the representatives of the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration and His Excellency the Rector of the University, Mr. Remus Pricopie, for the overall great contribution of the promotion of the democratic values and to the genuine change in Romania. As it was mentioned, my name is Ioana. I represent GlobSec, Bratislava, where I lead the Sea Energy Hub. But I'm as well proud to say that I'm a member of the SNSP family and very thankful for this invitation. My colleagues before presented and highlighted the obvious link between the energy and the democracy, and therefore I would like to briefly present some of the trends that are impacting the developments in our region with regards to energy, and to shortly highlight the role of the 3Cs initiative in enhancing the resilience in the region. The multi-layered crisis and the outbreak of the Russian war against Ukraine, of course, profoundly impacted and accelerated the global, but most of all, European energy system. Even before the war, the European Union was already on the path of gradual reduction of carbon footprint. The war became a catalyst for this process. In the meantime, one of the first impacts on the 3Cs initiative is that once the decline of competing projects from Russia and China started, the role of the initiative increased. And basically, it became the key player in the region. Now, since the European Union reduced by 90% of its oil imports and around 2/3 of gas from Russia, the question is what are the challenges and opportunities that, since also Greece joined, the 3 countries are facing. First one is the definite decoupling from Russian fossil fuels, and it is an irreversible process. We had recently an event in Brussels, and I addressed the following question. Let's just say that hypothetically tomorrow the war stops and Russia will be promoting democratic values. What will happen to our energy connections? Are we going to re-establish the old paths of energy supplies to Europe? And although there are some skeptical positions and we acknowledge the role of gas in the foreseen future, I could definitely confirm that this is decoupling from Russian fossil fuels is an irreversible process. We are often engaging with numerous private and also governmental stakeholders from the energy sector, and we're noticing a really important trend of re-technologization. What I mean is the whole sector, starting from oil and gas, continuing with nuclear, but also renewables, are decoupling in technical terms from the Russian fossil fuels and adapting their spare parts, their capabilities to the new sources and types of energy. Despite, as I mentioned, the fact that the market will still benefit from conventional gas and LNG deliveries, which are unfortunately even increasing in the last period from Russia, the war triggered this unprecedented shift. The region is even more impacted due to our proximity, of course, and our specifics when it comes to energy. With the processes that I mentioned, the problem of critical raw materials and spare parts becomes more and more important. And here I think that the historical experience in the energy field that our countries, and particularly Romania, Slovakia, Czech Republic, but also the Baltic states and Croatia, when it comes to their success with regards to LNG capabilities, along with the region's potential to innovate and the potential to turn the region in a provider of energy sources, transport, technology and spare parts is crucial. The second topic and trend that I wanted to discuss with you today is the fact that, of course, we need diversification of supply, at least for short and medium term. As some countries are more dependent than the others in the region, oil and gas sources, there's still an inherited risk of dependencies of petrostates. The region needs further diversification and interconnection to secure its energy options. But in an interconnected market, we need to be aware of the increasing fossil dependencies on countries moving beyond Russia. Apart from Russia, the region's imports of oil and gas from other suppliers, including petrostates, countries which heavily depend on the rent generated by the oil and gas industry. A Russian example made it clear that such an interdependence is working both ways and can be exploited by any party to exert power and increase pressure. All these realities must increase even more our efforts to achieve energy independence and resilience. Our strategies must include engagement with this actor by maintaining and promoting democratic values and the EU's priorities. Third, and it is connected to the previous topic, we need to adapt to the ongoing process of redefining the concept of energy security. Already across the transatlantic community in Washington, in Brussels, but as well in international forums, alongside with academia, everybody acknowledged that the old paradigm of secure and affordable energy is clearly obsolete. This paradigm has shifted to issues of security of supply, not only around fossil fuels, but also on critical raw materials, as I mentioned, for the green transition. Our strategic vision on promoting regional projects on energy must take into consideration this multi-layered new concept of energy security for a more present security, with a more present security dimension. Last but not least, because I'm aware about the time management, green transition and climate change. It was mentioned today, but I think it is important to highlight its role. Despite huge investment deficits, inflation and its related limitations, we are also facing huge opportunities, in my view. The EU managed to absorb the main shocks of the war. At the same time, Ukraine became in many cases a showcase example for innovative military and energy solutions. Besides conventional capabilities, it possesses huge potential for future regional green projects, for example. It is the role of our region to have vision and to integrate the need to enhance regional energy security while incorporating the green transition priorities. Here, the role of the bordering states is extremely important in my view. While we show the consistent role with our aid offered to Ukraine, both when delivering energy sources but also spare parts for the industry, I believe there is a great opportunity for our countries to have vision and to integrate the regional green agenda in our energy projects. This is how we can think strategically and include future economic and commercial opportunities. it becomes clear that we would find ourselves in a more advantageous geopolitical position in a future clean energy. This is why I believe that initiatives such is the Austrian one to connect Ukraine, Hungary and Slovakia through a hydrogen project, or Croatian initiative to become part of hydrogen valleys, or the potential of pipelines to carry hydrogen projects are to be welcomed and replicated. So we really move towards beyond fossil fuel-based projects and to incorporate new technologies in order to further interconnect the region. And I will end by saying, like Minister Deca said, that a democratic Europe can only exist with an educated Romania. I believe that a resilient, prosperous, democratic and sustainable Europe cannot exist with a secured vision and resilient in terms of energy, 3Cs initiative region. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the effort putting so much information in a very limited time. I'm curious if you see the answer to the energy crisis or the answer to more independence from an energetic point of view within the 3Cs community or outside it, but we will talk about this later on. Well, going to the last expert, last but not least expert, which is Vladimir Mildev, a journalist from Bulgaria, from Cross Border Talks, a dear friend of ours. Please, Vladimir, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank to the organizers for this invitation. My speech will deal with some issues which were already touched by others, especially in the first panel, the polarization issue, and as well as the public sphere, European public sphere. In my view, Bulgaria is suffering a strong polarization right now, and of course Bulgarian society has been marked by in-group form of social life. In Western Europe, this type of society usually is called tribal, the issue of tribes is raised, and in the case of the Balkans, usually it's used the word mafia, maybe not obligatory in the criminal way, but in the sense that people somehow live through these in-groups and lose their individuality, etc. However, in these specific conditions of our world, we have a situation in which the American president divides the world into democracies and authoritarian regimes, and we have a situation in which the Russian president attacks Ukraine, and inside the European Union, this contradiction between pro-European Commission and sovereignist forces has been also strong recently. So all this, all that international context certainly strengthens the polarization and the culture of domination, mutual domination, which exists in Bulgarian society. And in my view, it has some challenges, if not even problems, to democracy. First of all, let me start with this, that at the last elections, parliamentary elections which took place on 2nd April this year, only 40% was the voter turnout. And that means that the government which was eventually formed has the support of maybe 20% of all the voters or even less, because in fact the voters of these two parties or groups of parties supported, originally they voted out of desire to vote against the other partner in the coalition which was formed. So that is maybe one first dimension, that in the conditions of polarization, many people become apathetic and disengage from politics. They leave it to some very engaged and influential propagandists or fighters in social networks, and that is potential danger, because at certain moment, maybe if international conditions change, what the pro-European or pro-democratic option stands for could be attacked from some mobilization out of these disenchanted people. Secondly, we are in a situation in which our region undergoes modernization, and there has been this so-called PNRR in Romanian, a National Plan for Recovery and Resilience, which aims at certain reforms. However, when you have polarized society, any attempt to bring some serious reform, such as green transition, or in the case of Bulgaria, the efforts to move the country closer to the Eurozone, it gets immediately immersed in these polarized contradictions between, let's say, Western Europe or sovereignists or whatever you call them, pro-European Commission and national allies or autochthonous allies. So in that situation, the energy for change and the ability of the government to promote change in society is limited because you don't work with the whole society and maybe you work with only a part of it. And if too much effort is put into certain reform and resistance is strong, there is a risk of breaking the society. However, for me, the most, maybe it's my specifics, but I am most interested in the third negative aspect of this polarization is related to the media space. In the case of Bulgaria, it's very obvious that our media are unable to form an independent and so-called fourth state form of existence. They're also taken over by this polarization. We have some media who are maybe more professional, but also tend to be funded by foundations such as America for Bulgaria or some oligarchs who are considered on the good side. And we have some other media who are maybe somehow appealing more to populist tendencies or autochthonous tendencies in national capital, etc. And as a result of that, we journalists don't quite have a strong solidarity between one another, and we tend to label one another and to reduce ourselves to either grant holders, which means that people are taking their money or salaries from Western foundations, or so-called rubourgeois, or people who are promoting, let's say, Eastern interests. And I think that is, of course, a negative aspect as journalism and media are supposed to be an independent space which could be critical of any party. And once again, if we look at the idea of reform and change, there is a need for more media, or more journalists, or more voices to be able to speak to all the parties of societies, and not only to one selected group, which is their echo chamber. In the case of Bulgaria, this is also seen in the case of professional organizations of journalists, with one of them, the Association of European Journalists, being apparently very well linked to Western media organizations, and the other being opened and more appealing to the old generation, more open to countries such as China, Vietnam, and Russia. So I see here some potential for the 3Cs initiative and for regional cooperation initiatives to bring change in such a situation of great polarization. And I believe it could happen through more projects and more support for so-called cross-border media. I was presented as one of the voices and editors of Cross-Border Talks, which is a media published by a Polish foundation called Napshot Foundation, but it is in fact a Polish, Czech, Bulgarian, Romanian cooperation between journalists. And I am also involved with a second media, which is Bulgarian Romanian in its essence. It publishes all its materials in Romanian and Bulgarian in English. It's called The Bridge of Friendship. So in both cases, these media allow me as an author and a journalist to somehow stand a little bit outside of our strong polarization and to learn and open to the region and learn from it. And I think that could be one way to promote a more democratic, tolerant, and modern way of thinking in our societies when we are aware of what is going on in our region or in our neighboring countries, when we are able to be a little bit detached, a little bit looking with certain buffer to our national strong passions, maybe we will be able to really grow in peace and become more sophisticated in our thinking, which I think is one of the ideas of what some of other speakers discussed about European citizens and European public sphere. So my entry here is that, or my proposal, if you wish, is that 3Cs initiatives could think not only about innovation funds or investment funds, but maybe it could also discuss internally the idea of some media funds or some possibilities for cooperation between media in the region, which could be, however, it's important that, in my view at least, the principle of support for this media should be not the one that is promoting polarization. So for me, it's very interesting to choose, in a way, not either or, one side or the other, but to choose both any poles in our societies and be able to change them. Thank you.
Thank you everyone. I would love to have more, enough time for interactions, especially in the academic world where accustomed with back and forth questions. I would love to speak about Lippmann and John Dewey, about public sphere and many other topics. For sure we'll have the chance to do this today during lunch, but also in the future cooperation, because I'm happy you mentioned you have been close to our academic community for already many, many years, and we are proud and honored to have you here. Also, I will pick a word, pessimistic. You know what an American diplomat at one moment told me, saying you, the academics, generally do a big mistake. You are trying to explain everything and to find a logic in the event, when in fact the society sometimes is not coherent and not necessarily there is a logic behind. Maybe this diplomat, good friend of mine, is right, maybe it's not. And for this reason, we try today to combine different perspectives and to have politicians, to have diplomats, to have academics, researchers, journalists, and we still have two other interesting perspectives from someone who for decades was in the military and responsible for real conflicts and challenges, and someone from business but also for diplomatic area. And for this final session and concluding session, I kindly invited our colleague Antonia Polibeșanu to try to manage the dialogue between General Jones and Ambassador Mosbacher. But let me tell you before, because this is the moment of Atlantic Council in this session, to mention, I did already in the beginning, but you were not here because you had other commitments to other sessions, to underline the cooperation between CNSPA and Atlantic Council already for many years. Alex Sherban being the driver of this cooperation, not just with CNSPA but also Atlantic Council and Romanian government and different other institutions. And I think this is important for us and for Romania. Also, we co-organized together in 2018 the Business Forum, and we started December 2021 to work together on the Black Sea security topic, because both institutions said, underlined in December 2021, the Black Sea is going to become a hot sea. And unfortunately, we were right. Before to let Antonia to take over, I had a discussion with the President of the Senate, Nicolae Ciucă. He is a retired general, former Prime Minister of Romania, today leads the Liberal Party. And he told me Saturday we had an event saying, you know, the Three Seas initiative, the implication of Romania in the Three Seas initiative somehow started in a dialogue between me, General Ciucă told me, and General Jones, many, many years ago. And I'm telling you because you are an academic, and you have to try to understand and to read events, and I said thank you very much, Mr. President, for letting me know. So I knew General Jones has been involved in this area for many, many years, but I didn't know till Saturday he can ask for the title of one of the pilots of the 3Cs initiatives. I start here. I am a professor of communication, and we haven't had classes during the summer, so you can understand me. Antonia, take over.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure indeed to have our distinguished guest tell us about, not only about their concerns and what they regard the challenges for the platform, but also to invite them to tell us a bit about the history of this initiative. And I do that because earlier in the morning, I basically had two flashbacks. Before becoming an academic myself, I was a geopolitical analyst working at Stratfor, and I remember the days before 2014 when we were discussing about the Intermarium, how to connect the two seas back then, the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, and how can we manage to basically proactively come against potential aggressive Russia. And then General Jones basically told me about this initiative being, in fact, an initiative to strengthen the cooperation also between the two seas through the so-called Northern-Southern Corridor for Europe, which he was part of the signatories and he was part of the initiators. So I will start by asking him to give us a few words about the history with a footnote. How do you see it today?
Thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be with you. I'm particularly proud to be with my co-chair, Georgette Mosbacher, who was a terrific ambassador to Poland in the previous administration, and is, as I like to say, it embarrasses her each time that she's not a person you meet, she's an event you experience. And we will soon see what I mean by that. I retired from active duty in 2007, and I became soon thereafter chairman of the Atlantic Council of the United States. And it is really an anchor point in my life because it keeps me connected with my European roots. My family moved to France in 1946. I was educated in Europe, and I returned to the United States in 1962 and began a 40-year military career, which terminated, ironically, in NATO in 2007. In other panels, they've said that this is off the record, and that we quote Chatham House rules. It's online? Good. So I'm talking to all my friends. I remember talking to a Washington Post reporter, and I asked him, what does off the record mean to you? And he says, well, it generally means that we can't quote you unless it's really good. So you might want to remember that. I remember that forever. So to get to Antonia's question, it's just, I mean, history is important, and the work that the Atlantic Council did in 2013, starting with our really Polish partners. I remember a gentleman named Paweł Oleknowicz, who was the chairman of the Central Europe Energy Partners Organization and the Central and Eastern Europe Development Institute. And we started with the idea that for Europe to be whole and free and prosperous and all the things we want, that Eastern Europe had to be given the opportunity to catch up with Western Europe. And so the initial study was completed on the 21st of November of 2014, and the title of it was Completing Europe, the North-South Corridor for Energy, Transportation, and the Digital Progress. It has blossomed over the years into something that none of us really expected, although we hoped for. Its inspiration was really the post-World War II Marshall Plan, but one specifically designed for Eastern Europe. Those of you who lived in Europe at this time probably remember that Western Europe was not particularly thrilled with this idea because they saw it as an attempt by the U.S. government to penetrate the European market with American companies and so on and so forth. Over time, that has been overcome, and it's wonderful to see after so many years, over 10 years really, the support that the 3Cs initiative and the development of the investment fund have contributed and will continue to make contributions not only to European security, but as a global example of what can be done when the private sector, the public sector, the academia, think tanks work together for a common goal. So a little bit of history about where we are today.
Thank you very much. It is a very good introduction, I believe. For my next question to Mrs. Mosmacher, but still I have to say that I'm nervous for two reasons. I have learned about your presence when I was in Poland, when back in 2020, someone in the think tank, that they have probably the most wonderful American ambassador who dedicates her work not only to the bilateral relationship, but also to the security and strengthening whatever we are working on when we are geopolitical analysts and talking about this connection between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. So forgive me for being nervous about this today, but it is also my pleasure to actually ask you, how do you see we have evolved? And not only, I will ask, because this is a fireside chat, I will ask about your opinion not only as a diplomat, but also as an entrepreneur, because I also am familiar with your work in the business world. So what do you think? Where have we gotten to since a while ago?
Well, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here, and you can imagine what an honor it is for me to co-chair with a four-star general who is also National Security Advisor, Supreme Commander of NATO. I mean, I could go on, it's pretty intimidating, but it's a great honor. This idea of the 3Cs initiative, I thought in its inception was important in order to take a look at the region that was behind the Iron Curtain for so long. And then all of a sudden, it has to compete with the West. And that takes investment in infrastructure and the kind of things that are not easy and can be done overnight. I think Central Eastern Europe has done an amazing job. I know there's a lot of criticism with respect to freedom of the press and judiciary and all of those kind of things. I think they're overplayed, frankly. I don't know of any election in any of Central Eastern European countries that wasn't considered free and fair. So, having said that, this initiative needed to happen because to have a voice today in just about anything, you have small countries, Central Eastern Europe, and you only have 3 million people. people with an over $2 trillion GDP, that's growing twice as fast as the West, you have a voice. And that's what the 3Cs initiative, I believe, has really given to Central Eastern Europe. Having said that, it did something quite remarkable in creating the 3Cs investment fund to get 12 countries to invest in a fund in itself is remarkable. Normally committees like that, very, very hard to make work, but this did. The investments that were made been very successful, well managed. What didn't happen was the attracting private capital. And that's the challenge now. And I think that the 3Cs initiative needs to move beyond where it's been. And it has to really set up a office, secretariat, and now go to the next stage of being real with respect to being able to attract private capital. I know setting up a second fund and it's talking about a regional investment bank. I think that's a good idea. You have to have a voice in the EU. That's not easy to do when you're a small country, but when you have 100 million people, to be able to get together and have one voice, you're going to be heard, and you can make an impact on the policies, etc., that's happening in the EU. But you have to take the next step of really formalizing and putting together a staff. And I'm not talking about big bureaucracy, I don't think that's necessary, but you need a professional staff to take the 3Cs initiative and the 3Cs fund and business to the next stage. But it can be done. It's not easy when you have now 13 countries. I think probably the first move needs to be 13 countries hiring someone, one of the best and the brightest, to be a CEO. Look, the CEO of Disney does not go to his board of directors to ask what kind of movie you make. When you have 13 voices, it's very difficult to get anything done. I think the next step is for the 13 countries to come together, hire someone that they trust, and move this initiative forward. So that's, in a nutshell, where I see it now and hopefully in the near future.
Thank you. So build a secretary, make it serious, get private capital in. Now, while this is happening, we are no longer just doing this for peace and prosperity in Europe overall, but we are also doing this because we have an actual threat at the border. We have an ongoing war in Ukraine, and we actually have that aggressive Russia threatening to become more aggressive or being more aggressive in the hybrid warfare sphere as we speak. That said, my next question to General Jones would be, what do you believe should be our next step when it comes to dealing with Russia and rebuilding Ukraine, considering the platform that we have here? And just to give you a summary of what our sessions this morning were about, we were discussing about the role of education and
the planet was the collapse of the Soviet Union. The second point he made was that NATO will always be the arch enemy of Russia. And the third point he made was that there had been he said, gentlemen's agreement, not in writing, that former Warsaw Pact countries, that NATO would never expand into former Warsaw Pact countries. And he elaborated on that for an hour. We stayed another hour so that my president could actually make a response. But after the meeting, on the way out to the car, President Obama turned to me and said, you know, popular word in those days was reset with Russia. And the president said, this is likely to be a short reset. And it turned out to be prophetically true. There will be shortly a study that will be released maybe this week, done by the Atlantic Council on the Black Sea strategy. And it addresses the question that you raised, and it talks about what now. I mean, I think one thing that we have to all agree on, I think, and even hold hands when we do it, is to say that the defense of Europe is a real issue. It's unfortunate. We don't like to talk about it. But borders for European security are no longer Germany. They are the Black Sea countries and the Baltic states. And you can draw the north-south line pretty clearly as to what that entails. Inadvertently, I'm sure, that Mr. Putin miscalculated, dramatically miscalculated, the resilience of the West and the capacity that the West has to thwart most Russian ambitions in the region. That's not going to prevent them from trying in all manners and shapes of things. But if I were him, I would be sleeping at night with my eyes open, because I know that he never visualized that two more countries would join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Never in his wildest dreams. Never in his wildest dreams did he think about the resilience of the Ukrainian people and the capacity and quality of the Ukrainian armed forces, which have been astonishing to many people, but for those of us in the trade knew that the Ukrainians had years ago adopted a more Western style of warfare, which the Russians rejected, and the capacity and the capability between the two, particularly the first year when Ukraine was on the defensive and Russia was on the offensive, were really on clear display. This year, Ukraine is on the offense and Russia is more on the defense. And in military terms, that takes much more manpower to be about 3 times as much manpower to play offense as opposed to defense. So, what can we do? I think we have to be clear-eyed and tackle the overall strategic issue that on the globe, let alone the region, on the globe, we have a battle between autocracies and democracies. And it's very, very important for your children, your grandchildren, my children, grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren by the time I'm through. It's very important that we win this. And how we do that is not by military might alone. It's by a coordinated, effective, rapid, flexible series of international policy that shows nations that on different continents that are vacillating between autocracies and democracy, that the best way by far is to be a successful democracy. In the case of the region, in the case of the Black Sea region, I would say that expanded accession to the treaties by countries who would like to become members that should be expanded and should be accelerated. So there's a clear line that separates Russia and its observers, and I mean, by that I mean China, I mean Iran, I mean North Korea, and other countries on different continents that are having this tug of war between which way they want to go. And one of the ways we do this is by tightening the sanctions on Russia, convincing China that it's backing their own wars, making sure that the president of China sees the consequences that will fall to Vladimir Putin as a result of his barbaric efforts in Ukraine. He is, by the ICC standards, a war criminal, and he should always be a war criminal. And it will be very important, regardless of how this conflict ends, to make sure that the world sees Vladimir Putin for what he is. There's no forgiveness here. There's no, oh well, let's let bygones be bygones. This is a moral issue of the highest qualities, a value issue of the highest democratic principles, and that should not be forgiven. Secondly, the military coefficient I think is important. We can all be very proud of how NATO has reacted, I think. As I mentioned earlier, the defense of Europe does not start with Germany. It starts right here. And it's important that Russia sees that a formidable obstacle to going any further than it has already gone. And in order to do that, you have to do a lot of things that the European countries have already done. That's increase their percentage of GDP for your military capabilities, relocate forces closer to the line where the defense of Europe starts, and present a formidable obstacle to any more of Vladimir Putin's expansionist ideas. Sanctions that we have not used can be applied, and I would strongly recommend that be considered. And lastly, I would just say that appeasement is not the strategy here. We don't want World War III, but we tried appeasement with Russia, we tried appeasement with China, and other countries, and Iran in particular. That doesn't work with autocracies. And so I would counsel that you don't want to start a world war, but autocracies understand the demonstrated use of power, whether it's economic or military or social or cultural, financial. All of these things harnessed towards a given end can produce results that would preclude, I think, the world war or an expansion into nuclear conflict. And we'll just have to wait and see and do the best we can, but I hope I've answered your question.
It has given more food for thought than I thought about, actually, so thank you for answering that question. I know it actually may have a more extensive answer, and therefore I will ask the first question that comes to my mind, actually, after listening to what you said. And I will ask Ambassador, what do you think, because the Three Seas initiative was not about Russia, per se. It was about building that defensive line. It was about building cohesive economic prosperity in the region so that we can stand by and we can build a better future for us, primarily. But it was also about building the better future with regards to democracy versus autocracy and keeping the influence of China down in this region. So with that in mind, considering that you mentioned the Black Sea Strategy and the Black Sea Strategy document, on my knowledge, also mentions China as a threat in the Black Sea, considering that now the land corridors from Asia into Europe is pretty much blocked due to the conflict in Ukraine. And obviously, trade is being done through the Black Sea, and China is shipping through the Black Sea and is increasing its presence in this region. What do you think could be maybe some other measures that we could take in building resilience, considering the geoeconomic roundabout that I call we entered in 2022 when Russia started the war, and when we imposed sanctions and so on. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, certainly strengthening your economic well-being and investing in your security, in your military, as well as cyber. I do believe that Central Eastern Europe, where we're sitting right now, is the gateway for China into the West. And so I do think the 3 Cs, one of its jobs is to take a look at the security. It is the eastern flank of NATO. I do think that has to be part of the 3 Cs mandate, is to work together for interoperability. And that covers everything from infrastructure, rail, roads, ports, and cyber, because to have a strong military, you have to have interoperability. So I do think that's an important role for the 3 Cs initiative. So I think it does go beyond just, the infrastructure is fundamental to security. You can't move an army if you don't have the infrastructure to do so. So I think it's fundamental to that, and of course it's fundamental to prosperity. Countries that are prosperous aren't threatening. And you have those Russia and China right here. I'd like to maybe take it just a step further and say that I do think we do have to have some introspection here and ask ourselves, how did we get here? It's 21st century, to watch bombs drop on cities. Kind of, with all this technology and what we've, in the middle class that we've been able to create in the world, how did this happen? What were those failures of the great democracies that watched put 200,000 troops on the border of Ukraine and tell us what it was going to do, and yet we couldn't stop it? I think we have to just really examine that so it doesn't happen again. Because I do believe this wasn't a surprise. And so we have to ask ourselves, was it a surprise? And what should we have done? What could we have done? And what should we be doing so it doesn't happen again? And then the next question I think we have to ask ourselves, and particularly in this region, since Russia's your neighbor, is when Ukraine wins, then what? Russia isn't Cuba. It isn't Venezuela. I mean, it's a big country. And we've been pushing it. This is pushing it toward our enemies, North Korea, Iran, China. And so how do we make it pay a price, but at the same time figure out how we bring it back into the family? So that Russia is no longer a threat. And I'm not sure, I would like to see 3 Cs ask that question. It is your neighbor. And after all, we have an ocean between us, and So it'll impact you directly, how Russia is seen after it loses. So I do think there is a role for certainly the leadership in the 3 Cs to be sitting down and really having this discussion as to what does that look like? What does winning look like? And what does Russia look like when it loses? And how you deal with that, and how you want to rebuild a relationship that's positive so it isn't a threat any longer.
I think these are excellent questions to ask academics about. Because we have the power, I believe, to go to politicians and to business leaders and pretty much ask those questions and do research on that. But yes, as to the future questions, I have no way to get to those but through analysis. And before we end this fireside chat, for which I thank you already, I would like to ask you a very short question, maybe a short answer as well, I don't know. Because we have talked about threats, we have talked about weaknesses in a way, and we have talked about strengths. What are the opportunities that we see moving ahead? This is also because I'm an optimist, and I like to end on an optimistic note here. Considering everything that's going on, I believe the academia should be optimistic, because otherwise we don't have the power to ask around. So, what are the opportunities that you see for the region and for Europe? For both of you.
So I didn't mention in my previous answer education, but it's critical. It's critical not just in this region. It's critical all over the world, and it's critical in the United States. If you look at the polls in the U.S. about our involvement in Ukraine, you would probably be a little bit alarmed. And part of the reason for that is because our educational process is undergoing a tremendous shockwave of purpose. And it's very important that our education is honest in terms of history, and it has its rightful place in the education of our young people who will succeed us at tables like these in the future. Without education and without history, you have nothing. You are just living for the moment, and you can't be serious. So I'd say education across the board is very important. I also think that on the optimistic side of things, that the 3 C's concept takes root, it will have global consequences. And that's optimistic. It will have consequences in Africa. It will have consequences in our own hemisphere, in South America and other continents, for providing a guiding light, if you will, for a vision for a better life. If you want to cut down on illegal immigration from the African continent to the European continent, what better way is there than to present a model that works and they can emulate it? So that would be my optimistic projection, and I think it's quite possible that we could have that kind of impact.
I do think we have to face certain realities with social media and AI and misinformation and hybrid warfare, etc. We need to better educate, back to what the German said, we need to educate the next generation on being able to question what they read and hear and see. and how to deal with social media and the internet, and these are not new brainwashing techniques, but it's just more pervasive, and I think we have to face that. And then this whole woke dialogue, and if you can't discuss the problem, how do you fix it? And to accept the fact that we can have different opinions, but if we don't allow someone to state that other opinion, even if we really don't agree with it, we talk about free press, but when they shut you down at universities, they don't allow speakers because they don't like the message. We've seen a lot of that in the United States. That's very terrifying, personally, I think. No matter how repugnant that message may be. Better that it be heard and we can debate it than to shut it down by calling someone a name, or racist, or whatever word you want to use, to silence them. And I think we're using those words to do that. And I think that's dangerous. So I do think we have a whole new set of challenges with communication, being what they are today. And look, I can remember when there wasn't a cell phone. Yeah, I'm that old. I can't manage. It's hard for me to even imagine what did they do without a cell phone. You know, how did my mother keep track of where we were? And there were 4 of us. And she said, you had to be home by 11 o'clock. I think we were, if we weren't home at 11, then how did she find us? Right? But the truth is, we loved my mother as much as we feared her. That's why we were home at 11. She didn't need a cell telephone. But I think these are genuine challenges, and I don't mean to make light of them, but we are living in a new world where all of this, I pick up my telephone and these algorithms are telling me what I want to hear and what I want to see based on what I've already read, where I've already been. And I think that's dangerous. So I know that's not optimistic.
Just one more point. There's a think tank in the U.S. called Freedom House. And using Freedom House and the global freedom scores, the 3 Seas region averages on a score of 0 to 100. 3 Seas region averages a score of 86, which is quite good. The EU scores 90.5. The United States scores 83. And Russia scores 16. And that's it.
That's a good way to end on an optimistic note. Not really. But considering that, I'm telling you what I would have done with no cell phones today. I'd probably continue questions and debate because, I'm like him and I'm very curious about your answers. And I'm also hoping that you forgive my nervousness today. And with that, I have to end the panel because I was told on the message on the mobile phone, because, schedules do matter. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being with us and for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone for accepting to organize this session. It was the final session conceived on this event, but we underlined, as I mentioned in the beginning, how can we speak about development, about prosperity, without this kind of discussion, about the healthy of our society. And yes, like Antonia, I wanted to end but I think the most optimistic aspect is the fact that we are discussing it. We are interacting, sharing our ideas. This is the place where we can do this is a university. And related to the tension between academics, which many times, including myself, go publicly saying different, not so nicely, ideas about the public policies and sometimes even about politicians. I think we have to keep doing this in the future because I'm not saying we are all the time right, but at least we provoke, we catalyze discussions, a second thought on a specific public policy or governmental decision. And together with journalists, together with NGOs, together with specialized institutions of government, because we don't have to disconsider the capacity of our governments to produce good public policies. We have to look in an optimistic way forward. Once again, thank you very much. And before to conclude, I would like two other short things to mention. We've had today very quiet Ioana Popescu, university professor in our university, former vice rector in our university, and today she is the director, I think we can say rector of the Romanian Diplomatic Institute. She will attend a session this night on a discussion of the Black Sea. And the very final idea, we need also to record for the history this moment. We recorded the debate, but a picture together outside would be also very good. Thank you very much for your participation.
Da.